Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley here for another episode of the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on the podcast. Thank you all so much, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, again, YouTube, however you're taking this in. We really appreciate it. Love the support, and thank you guys so much. If you're on YouTube, give this video a like and share it around. We're going to have a ton of recruiting talk for this episode. You guys are going to really enjoy it, because since we last talked to Gene, Tennessee got another commitment on the men's side of things, and we also got an interesting recruiting, I wouldn't say story, but topic to talk about from a national media perspective of where Rick Barnes kind of ranks in their minds in the national landscape in recruiting. So Gene, get right into it here. Since we last spoke, in fact, you and I last time we spoke, we talked about Tennessee getting commitment because I think a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, I did a Lady Vol podcast. Didn't do one last week with Tennessee football starting up, and you covering Chattanooga, Gene. Didn't want to worry about trying to do a podcast right as football was starting, so took last week off. But good, not bad timing because there wasn't a whole lot going on until Friday of last week. Tennessee landed another big-time prospect in the 2023 class when power forward / center, big man, JP Estrella committed to Tennessee, one of the top big men in the country. He keeps kind of climbing up the rankings. Looking at On 3 right now, he is a top 50 prospect in their consensus. And in fact, he's a top 20 prospect in their overall rankings, just On 3. They have him as number 16 overall, number 4 power forward. He's kind of I think more or less a consensus top 50. I know 247 has him just inside the top 50 in their rankings as well. It's about a 6'10", 6'11", 210, 215 type of post player. And Gene, from watching his film and kind of what he brings to the table, and just looking at kind of, my amateur eye of watching his highlights and stuff, he already looks to me to be one of the more talented, just purely offensively talented big men, true big men too, that Rick Barnes has gotten at Tennessee. Maybe Tennessee's gotten in a very long time, because obviously, Grant Williams was a post at Tennessee, was a very talented offensive player, but he's not a true post. Look what he's playing in the NBA. He's a 6'6", maybe borderline 6'7", wing in the NBA, and he was an undersized 4 for Tennessee for his entire career at Tennessee, and did obviously an excellent job at that role. This is a guy who is a true, he can play the 5. He's listed again as a power forward or a center, so 4 or 5. I think some people have mentioned him as a stretch 4. I think in one of the circuits, if I remember seeing his stats correctly, he shot like 36% from 3, which as a 6'10", 6'11" guy, that's pretty darn good. But Gene, to me, this guy who comes from Maine, now plays for the Brewster Academy, but he's from South Portland, Maine. I think this is a phenomenal pickup for Tennessee. This is a guy you and I have talked about in this podcast before. I know back when he was still kind of ranked, I think maybe in the 100s or maybe just inside the 100s. I think you'd mentioned that he's one of the guys you mentioned that said you didn't care where he was ranked. He's a really good player. Syracuse wanted him. Iowa wanted him. Those were the two teams that were right up there with Tennessee to try to get JP Estrella. I think it really came down to Tennessee and Iowa. But Gene, Tennessee gets JP Estrella, and we'll talk a little bit more kind of in general about the class in a second, but this is really rounding out to look like to be a potentially, again, another excellent class for Tennessee in recruiting. But I think JP Estrella to me is a guy who checks off a lot of boxes that you and I have talked about from a big man perspective for what Tennessee needs in the future, or needs on the roster just in general, but especially for the future for what Tennessee's trying to do moving forward, I think. And I think Estrella, with some development and adding some more weight onto his frame, he's got a lot of potential, and he's already not just kind of, I don't think his ranking is just based off his athleticism and his size. I think he does bring a lot to the table already as he is. So while you talk, I'm actually going to look up some of his stats if I can find them, because I want to see what he was averaging rebounding wise, because I feel like he wasn't a bad rebounder, but I know for a fact that he brings a pretty good outside shot to his game.
Right. Well, I took a couple minutes while you were talking to kind of just get a feel for, try to remember who the kid was. Obviously, it's been a while, but Looking at highlights, obviously you're talking about a kid who can, who can block shots. Obviously he can shoot the three really well. One dribble gets to the basket pretty well. I don't, I usually like to try to throw together like a quick player comp. I don't really think that one comes to mind off the top of my head. I will say, when I watched Adu's highlights, uh, they're not similar. I think Adu's, probably a better athlete. And one of the things that Adu had to do was kind of learn some of the interior stuff because I never saw that in his highlights. Whereas Estrella, you see some of that stuff, like you see some of the interior stuff, and it feels like Tennessee is building the biggest basketball team in the country for the 23-24 season. Because they'll likely have Adu. Then now you've got Estrella. You've also got the kid from Alabama, the 6'9" kid that they're bringing in. That's probably, I would assume that's probably it for the big. Maybe, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what they're doing. We'll see what they're looking at. We'll see what they're going after. But yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about a kid who has the potential to be a really good college basketball player. I just think that as you look at the players that Tennessee's bringing in, that's one thing, one common thread. I mean, between Estrella, Cade Phillips, like I'm just seeing good quality basketball players. Obviously, DeLeon, kind of the same, and I did compare him to DeMar DeRozan when I watched him play. Just kind of how effortlessly he got to his spots. Like to do a lot of stuff in the mid range, but I think I noticed the class is ranked 7th in the country. They're probably not done. I don't know who they lose, but I hadn't really thought too much about who they lose. But like, there's going to be spots available, and obviously in this day and age, when the season's over, if there's a kid on the roster that that the coaching staff doesn't like, they'll just process them. If they see somebody that they would much rather have that they think they can get in recruiting, they'll just process them. And that's just kind of the way of the world nowadays, the ugly side of college basketball. But that also leads to opportunities for other kids, for other spots to build out your roster, to create your roster. And one thing that we've seen over the past 3 years really, is Tennessee does a lot of its recruiting from April until August. For that season, not for the following season, the upcoming season. So, but this is, to be able to bring in 3 players at this caliber, this early, and to potentially have 3 signees in November. I don't know anything about when these kids are going to sign, but to potentially have 3 guys locked in for your 2023 recruiting class, I think it's huge, especially when they're quality basketball players.
Yeah, and I agree. Like you mentioned, kind of building the super tall team, a super tall class. Estrella is such an interesting prospect too. That he's not a post player who's been a post for all his basketball career, where he's just always been tall. He's a guy who, as a freshman, was 6'3", and he's grown 8 inches since his freshman year of high school. Gene, like that's a massive growth spurt. Once you get into high school, he was a kind of a wing 6'3" guard type of kid as a freshman, and then now he is a 5. For I guess, well, he played for South Portland, but now he's going to be a Brewster Academy. But this past year, when he was 6'10", about to be 6'11" as a junior, he averaged 20.2 points, 11.8 boards, and 4.1 blocks en route to taking his high school to their first state championship, winning the first state championship in 30 years for South Portland. So again, it's interesting. I think Tennessee, I want to say they had another kid, might have been Drew Pember actually, if I remember right, who was a guard coming into high school and then hit a huge growth spurt. So I think I might be thinking of Drew Pember, but it's just Estrella, I think is, to me, just when I've seen his highlights and stuff, again, they're highlights, but to me it is a more polished prospect than what Pember was at this point in his high school career. But looking at a breakdown here on three from Jamie Shaw, who we talked about a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when Freddie DeLeon committed, he had a good breakdown of DeLeon as well. But he talked a little bit here about kind of what Tennessee is getting with JP Estrella. Talks about he's a good vertical athlete, runs well in straight lines, has excellent hands, and has some sneaky bounce around the basket, which will also help him on the defensive end as well. During the UAA Next Championships, he shot 35.7% from three. That's the number I was in my head there. I think shot 17 threes and shot, again, about 36% from three there. He mentions that Estrella is comfortable over his left shoulder on the block. When he posts up on the left block, the Synergy told Jamie Shaw that he scored 1.33 points per possession, which is pretty good. He scored 53.3% of the possessions when posted up in that left block area as well. And on defense, of course, I mean, the 4 blocks per game should tell you he's a very good rim protector on defense as well, and obviously averaged a double-double, so you imagine he's pretty good rebounding as well. But again, part of that has to do with the fact that he was a 6'10 player playing in Maine. I don't really know, what the competition was like. I'll be really interested to see what he does at Brewster Academy this upcoming season. But again, he's a guy who is still he's getting used to being 6'11", because he was 6'3", 2 years ago at this point, 18 months ago, or maybe even less than 2 years ago. That's what's most intriguing to me, Gene, is that he's a pretty intriguing prospect from the fact that he already has a lot of these offensive skills, already seems pretty comfortable on the low block, and obviously being a rim protector, and he's grown immensely. He may not be done growing. I mean, at this point, he probably is, but I mean, there's an outside chance he sneaks up to being 7 foot by the time he gets to campus for Tennessee. I mean, with the skills he has, I mean, you and I were talking before we were recording here about UTC having a 7-footer who, hits about 50% from three. I don't think Estrella will ever be that good from three, but if Tennessee gets a 7-footer who can shoot the 3 ball, I mean, that right there is the new age offense of college basketball.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about the kid from Chattanooga, the same as Jake Stevens, is really just the fact that he's been in college long enough to really develop that aspect of his game. And I mean, again, he shot 153s and made half of them last year, which is crazy for a kid who's 7 feet tall. But obviously, I think everybody aspires. I mean, look at the national championship game. The kid from Oklahoma, Brady, whatever his name is, the big kid, Manic.
Manic. Yeah.
That's a big kid who, again, defended, shot threes, and finished around the basket. And it's really, if in this guard-driven world that we live in, like if you have big men who just simply do those 3 things, yeah, the ball handling is nice. You want them to be at least competent in that regard. But at this level, especially when you're talking about the SEC, if he can just finish, shoot that little right-handed hook shot, make a decent percentage from 3, and just be like a good defender and rebounder, the rest kind of takes care of itself there. But again, at the end of the day, I'm looking at a kid who I think in a year or two will be helping this program. And I think that's what you want. That's what you want to have, is just consistency there. It's like, it's this changing landscape of college athletics. And maybe it doesn't change as much anymore, but it probably still will. If you can kind of maintain some similarity in your roster from year to year, that helps. And, at least 2 of the kids, you feel good about some of the players that Tennessee's bringing in, that they may be around for a while. Because they'll probably get playing time, A. And B, when you go to Tennessee, unless you're not getting playing time, you have no reason to leave. Like if people who are successful at a school like Tennessee aren't chasing something bigger, like that's more reserved for the UTCs of the world and the Indiana State, that's obviously Tyreek Key. It's more reserved for that. So you have opportunities to play for a team that's going to be on television a lot. It's going to play in New York, in other countries. I'm assuming it's got like about there's going to be one of those like overseas August trips coming up, European tours coming up in the next couple of years. I think you could take him once every 5 years. So you're going to have opportunities to play on big stages because Barnes has built a program that at least has the respect of getting top 15 sort of recognition in the grand scheme of things. So, like if you have the sorts of players that can now get that profile, that only helps them because again, like eventually they're going to, you could have pros out of it. They could, develop themselves in the pros. And you're talking about a kid in Estrella who at one point was 6'2", 6'3". That's what you're saying. And now he's 7 foot, so he's not done developing as a player either. Probably the most famous person that did that was Anthony Davis.
Yep.
Not saying that Estrella is going to be Anthony Davis, but kids who grow 8 inches from freshman year through senior year, it's probably a little more common than we think. It's just the problem is maybe the kid is like 5'9" when he gets to high school. Then all of a sudden you're 6'5". It doesn't sound as good as the kid who already gets to high school at 6'2" and grows to 6'10" or 6'3" and grows to 6'11" or whatever. So, yeah, like again, when I watch the highlights, I just look at a kid who I think will be able to contribute. It may take a year or so, but I think he can contribute and seems like he's a good player. So I think that's obviously a great win for the program.
Yeah, right now Tennessee has 3 guys in this class. You have Estrella, you have DeLeon, you also have Cade Phillips. We have talked about a couple of the guys, Silas Demery Jr. and Davin Cosby are kind of 2 other guys to watch for Tennessee on their recruiting right now. There's also another big man who just visited Tennessee and also is now, I think, has just visited or is about to visit Florida. I cannot remember his name now, but he is a foreign player who's he's drawn in the international competition stuff at a camp he just did. He's drawn comparisons to a young Oscar Tshiebwe in terms of his rebounding ability because his rebounding is phenomenal. Just the way he's a 6'10", 6'11" player who I think 245, 250. So big body. And also really just strong. It's like lean muscle. I've seen pictures of him when he visited Tennessee. Chinlu, I think Chinlu. I can't remember how you say his last name, but he's all of a sudden blown up big time. He came and visited in Tennessee. Now he's visiting Florida. And I think maybe even some blue bloods are going to try to get involved with him. But he's a guy who's going to really, I think, have an interesting road ahead for him in the recruiting show. That's a guy that Tennessee had on a visit as well. So some names to kind of keep in mind for Tennessee moving forward here in this 23 class. And I think you mentioned, Gene, I think a lot of the guys that Tennessee has committed so far are guys that I think have really high ceilings, but I don't know that I expect them to come in and be immediate, Kennedy Chandler type impact or Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer type impact guys, or even Josiah, for what he came in and did as a freshman, even being hurt, was still very impressive. The guy who, filled out the stat sheet, averaged about 8 points, 5 boards, and 2.5, 3 assists as a true freshman in the SEC in a year that obviously ended up being cut short due to COVID. But again, those year where he got hurt, in the middle of the season too, and still put up pretty good numbers. I don't know that any of these guys Tennessee has committed, I expect to put those numbers up when they first get here. But I also think you're going to have I think going into next year, you'll have some guys returning that I think Tennessee will be able to count on. But I think Tennessee is going to have I wouldn't say hit the transfer portal hard, but I think they're, next year I think we'll see Tennessee bring in for the first time under Rick Barnes more than one transfer in an offseason. I think maybe I'll be wrong, but so far under Rick Barnes, he's only brought in one actual true transfer from either a grad transfer or in the transfer portal, only one per offseason. Even before the transfer portal was a big thing, he still was doing that. You look at guys like Ian Childs and oh goodness, I'm forgetting some of the ones that were in his first few years at Tennessee. But once the transfer portal became a thing, Tennessee still only grabbed one. You had Victor Bailey Jr., you had Justin Powell. This year you had Tyreek Key. So you've not seen Tennessee get, they obviously were involved with other guys. We've not seen them attack it the way that other schools have. But I think this upcoming off season they're going to have to, because I think you're going to have too many holes that you don't want to insert freshmen into, or even insert maybe some sophomores into for next season. So, but that's next season. We're not even here, or that's next season. We're not even in for the next season yet. So I don't want to get too carried away with that. too much, Gene, but I do want to keep this recruiting train going because you kind of mentioned Rick Barnes and kind of the cachet he's built up and, the respect for the program and stuff that's happened with him at Tennessee here in the last 8 years. Yeah. And of course, his time at Texas and stuff too. But I want to talk about this list that the Field of 68 brought up, which we've talked about in the podcast before because there was, I don't remember who it was, Gene. One of the guys said something that caught attention of Vol Twitter. But for those of you who may not know who the Field of 68 is, they're kind of a podcast. They're kind of a media company, but they're mostly a podcast. It's a college basketball podcasting network that has a lot of former players, big names, former player stuff, and just different people all involved in college basketball who do podcasts that cover respective teams or respective conferences or just college basketball at large. I think they do a pretty good job. There's other people would disagree, but I think overall they do a pretty good job. I think it was it Rob Doster that I'm thinking of, Gene, that got Vol fans riled up, right? Am I getting the name wrong?
That was my guy, Terrence.
That's what it was. Yeah, Terrence. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it was. Anyway, though, Field of 68, they do a lot of, to me, some pretty interesting basketball coverage and pretty cool seeing a big just podcasting network all about college basketball. But they had last week, heading into Labor Day weekend and the start of football season, trying to get some basketball stuff here in the off season for them. They did a list of the top 20 recruiters in college basketball, and they didn't really say what their criteria was. I mean, they have a big almanac thing that's coming out, so they may elaborate more in that in terms of what their criteria is in determining what the top 20 or what makes it what they're looking at when they're making this list for the top 20 recruiters. But Gene, I'm interested mostly in where Rick Barnes comes in at. I'll run through the top 20 here. You have number 20. You have Chris Holtman of Ohio State. 19 is Mick Cronin at UCLA. 18 is Tommy Lloyd for Arizona. 17 is Andy Enfield for USC. Hubert Davis of UNC for North Carolina comes in at number 16. Number 15, you have Chris Beard at Texas. 14 is Brad Underwood at Illinois. And then at 13 is Rick Barnes for Tennessee. So Rick Barnes comes in at number 13 on the list. So inside the top 15, but not quite in the top 10. Barnes at 13, and then here's some interesting ones too. Right after Rick Barnes, Bruce Pearl for Auburn, number 12. Nate Oates for Alabama at number 11. And then you get into the top 10, and you have John Shire for Duke at number 10. Number 9 at Oregon, you have Dana Altman. Eric Musselman for Arkansas at 8. Juwan Howard at Michigan for 7. Scott Drew for Baylor at 6. Here's one that casual fans may not will probably scoff at, but you and I've already talked about him on the podcast before in the past, Gene. Rick Stansbury at Western Kentucky at 5. Bill Self, Kansas at 4. Leonard Hamilton at 3 for Florida State. And your top 2, number 1's not a surprise. It's John Calipari. But number 2 is Penny Hardaway of Memphis, which I know it's probably going to get a lot of Vol fans maybe a little riled up having Penny at number 2. But Gene, and that whole thing, you have Rick Barnes at 13, and he is, I want to say, off the top of my head, he is fifth. Yeah, 5th in the SEC because you have Calipari at number 1. Then you have Musselman at 8. So that's 2 guys ahead of him. And then you have 2 other guys right ahead of him at Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl. So Barnes is number 13 in the country, number 5 in the SEC in terms of top recruiters according to Field of 68. Before we get to more of the list, do you think that's a fair ranking of Rick Barnes at number 13 and being 5th in the SEC? Because I've kind of gone back and forth in my head about where I think Rick Barnes should be, and I think you can make an argument for him being in the top 10, but then you're going to have to move around some of the other guys in the top 10. And I don't know. It's tough for me. I think I'm fine with him being top 15. I think that's nowhere anywhere where I would think Tennessee men's basketball head coach would be in recruiting my whole lifetime. Even Bruce Pearl, as good as he was a coach, I wouldn't have put him as a top 15, maybe even top 20 recruiter at Tennessee in his time at Tennessee. Yes, he did land some pretty impressive guys like Tobias Harris and Scotty Hobson and the like, but I don't know that it would put him number 13 where Rick Barnes is. So I think 13 is fair, but I think it's understandable for Vol fans to say, hey, why isn't he higher? Then it's also just the weird little, I don't know, I wouldn't say slap in the face, just the weird thing of having him and Bruce be right there next to each other is just kind of funny to me. And it makes sense. They've gone head to head for a lot of recruits over the last few years. then having Nate Oates and Eric Musselman ahead of him kind of makes sense. Those are, especially Nate Oates, that's not a basketball power, and he's been able to land a lot of high profile prospects and transfers to Alabama. So, Gene, do you think it's fair to have Rick Barnes with 13? Because I think it's, again, it speaks to where he and his staff have been able to kind of, bring Tennessee's brand. Having them in the top 15 is impressive, but I also almost think you could make an argument to have him higher.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I say it because, like, I'm trying to think of, like the names that Tennessee has brought in. I guess I guess the highlight of recruiting was the Jaden Springer, Keon Johnson, Kennedy Chandler grouping. I know it's not the same year, but that's two separate years. But I would probably argue that that's the highlight of it. Huntley Hatfield didn't necessarily work out, or otherwise that may have been a feather in the cap. We'll see what this 2023 recruiting class is. Josiah Jordan James has been a nice player, but for the ranking, for people who really lean onto the ranking a lot, heavily, it hasn't been necessarily, expectations versus reality there. So yeah, you're probably talking about what, four, like really like three or four guys, and that is, and again, I'm obviously forgetting. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, the kid they just brought in, who's a freshman this year. Who's the kid they just brought in? Phillips.
Yeah, Justin or Julian Phillips. Sorry.
Yeah, and so like maybe that, but that was more or less just kind of stepping in where Will Wade, kind of got himself in trouble. So I mean, like obviously Barnes has had success. I don't think that's the issue. I don't think that's disputable. But look at the guys that he's going. Look at the guys he's behind. I think this list is the equivalent of like all conference teams, all like professional teams, like all NBA, all pro, all star, Pro Bowl. Everybody refers to something as a snub, and quickly the reply is, well, who are you going to take out?
Yeah,
I don't think Barnes has been as. I think Nate Oates has been probably slightly better, which hence the ranking. I'd say Pearl's got what, at least two guys in the three guys in the pros in the past like 3-4 years. I'd say. We'll see what happens with Kessler, and that technically, I mean, I guess to my point earlier about Julian Phillips. I mean, that was more Roy Williams when there, but he just Walker Kessler's played at Auburn. Also, Walker Kessler, JP Estrella. There we go. Boom. The Walker Kessler's play at Auburn is kind of what got him drafted. Then you've got Isaac Okoro, who's in a great situation right now. I think it's the starting small forward of a team in Cleveland that's going to be really good and really exciting. There's probably somebody else I've forgotten, but they had the kid who tore his ACL in 2019. I think got drafted by the Magic.
Yeah,
I don't think it's worked out, but like if those are the guys that you're kind of behind, I think any of those three are probably interchangeable, but I don't think I have any issue with it. I understand people have an issue with Penny, but since Penny's been there, regardless of how you frame how he got these guys, he got JP. He had the number one recruiting class in the country. I mean, we can't point. He didn't. He may not have done the job necessary with that class, still think if Wiseman's available all year, that's a vastly different season. But he got that class in there that was number one in the country. And he then got we got a lottery pick. Now the Amani Bates thing didn't work out, but you know, we're talking about situations where who wouldn't take those guys?
Yeah.
Like I understand it didn't work out, but who doesn't take the kid who 2 years ago was being compared to Kevin Durant? Who doesn't take that guy? Yeah, you get them and things may or may not work out, but you have to, if you've got the chance to get that guy, you get that guy. Calipari, we know, enough said there. So yeah, like I don't think I have any real pushback. I think I'm content with where Barnes is. I mean, it's something that's made to get all of us talking.
Yeah,
it has zero value. Like it's just it's guys who I think do good work. I know a few of them, few of those guys. It's just guys who are doing what we're all doing, what all basketball people are doing this time of year. Hey, it's slow. Well, that's right. I mean, obviously they put this out right before college football like really got started, but for people who are locked in on basketball right now, it's like, well, we've got like 2.5 months. What can we do? List. Let's put together a list, and that'll get people talking. And here we are on a Tuesday night in September, talking basketball, talking list, talking is Rick Barnes too high, too low, just about right. Or what was it Greenberg that overrated, underrated, properly rated, whatever it was. We're doing that. So it's really a win for the field of 68, but I see no issue ultimately with what we see in terms of the rankings, because maybe he could be up higher, one or two more, but you look at all the 5-star guards that NATO has brought in, and you look at some of the success that Bruce Pearl has had. I guess those are the people that you have the most that people have the most pushback against. Expectations versus reality when you play Rick Stansberry, because he's brought multiple prospects to Bowling Green, Kentucky, to play in Conference USA or wherever they are now. Believe it's Conference USA. Yeah, they tried to get in. They tried to get in the MAC, and the MAC wanted MTSU and didn't want Western Kentucky. Those two have to go together. So yeah, like I think at the end of the day, as we wrap this up, I have no issue with it, because it's on a list that means anything.
Yeah,
Rick Barnes is not going to not get in some sort of Hall of Fame because the field of 68 was like, oh man, I think he's 13th. And if he was 10th, he would have got in. Then you have an issue. But that's the stand now.
I think it's interesting. I saw several comments on the Twitter thread with the whole top 20 list of people throwing out names of, where's this guy? But I think two guys that made a lot of sense of not being in the top 20 that I thought, those are good points by the fans here. Mark Few and Tom Izzo. Like they didn't register in my brain when I was going through the list, but kind of surprised that those two guys got in the top 20. I know this obviously isn't Tennessee talk, but I think fans or people listening to this probably, obviously you're listening to a college basketball podcast. You probably care about just college basketball, maybe not just Tennessee, but I think not having Mark Few or Tom Izzo is kind of interesting. I mean, those are two guys who've been around for a long time, especially Few. I mean, doing what he's done at Gonzaga, like that's, I guess, having Chris Holtman of Ohio State, Mick Cronin at UCLA's, I don't know. I think you could probably put Few and Izzo in before those guys, at least. I don't know that those are two guys I think, you talk about snubs and stuff, like you mentioned, kind of, all conference teams and all Americans, whatnot. But Izzo and Few have been doing it for a long time, especially Izzo. But Few, to me, I think should be in the top 20. Again, I don't know what Field of 68's like criteria was for picking these guys, but I do want to say that, I agree with you. I think Barnes is pretty properly rated on that list, but kind of surprised neither one of those two coaches are on that top 20. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't have as much of a finger on the pulse of college basketball as I thought, Gene. But I feel like Few and Izzo are two top 20 recruiters in college basketball. Again, maybe this is looking at just the last like 10 years, 15 years of recruiting or something like that. And maybe those, I don't know. Again, I don't know what the whole thing is. Again, Photo 66 or 68 has a thing called the Almanac where they're doing a big whole like 2022, 23 college basketball preview thing. So maybe they get into it a little bit more about what their reasoning is behind this list. But I think those are two good coaches that fans are brought up in terms of, why are these guys snubbed? Mark Few and Tom Izzo.
I hadn't even thought about those names. I don't know. Like the thing with Izzo, those are both guys who, for the most part, have just they don't always go. Where was Bill Self on this list?
He was I think he's number 4. He was number 4 overall.
Okay, okay. Because I kind of look at Bill Self a little bit like I look at um, no, and that's not fair because Self has stuff going on.
Yeah.
Always. I was about to say I almost look at Self and Izzo in the same light, but uh, Izzo's done it the right way, I guess, quote unquote, over the years, and Few was brought in, Jalen Suggs and Holmgren, and he's getting guys now, but I mean, I can't think of a ton of those guys that have been there. And again, I don't really keep up with Gonzaga recruiting like that to think of all the guys all the guys they brought in over the years. But I think I always maybe associate Gonzaga more so with. I understand that obviously they're recruiting at a higher level now, but I've always felt like they were the program that just will take the guys and get the guys and try to develop them. I think they've had what 2 one and done.
Yeah, I think that was the point I was about to make. Because I feel like I know me personally am mentally like conflating recruiting with development, and maybe that's I think you make a good point. I don't know that Gonzaga Mark Few necessarily belongs on the list because I don't think they've recruited in terms of bringing in high profile players, but they've developed guys, and I think that's why I'd like to know the criteria of this list, because to me that would make Rick Barnes has been known for being we've talked about ad nauseum at this podcast about being development U at Tennessee, but I think you're right. Like Few and his coaches throughout the years have been elite developers. They've just now recently in the last few years really started to turn that into recruiting gold as well. So yeah, that was the point I was about to make. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Right, and I always feel like Izzo's kind of that as well. Like Izzo gets like the quote unquote 5-star guys, and that may be what I'm doing with the whole Izzo Self thing. Self isn't exactly known for recruiting one and done. Like I feel like that's something that's been kind of portrayed. I mean, because of the issues with his recruiting. But I can't think of a ton of like just Kansas one and done guys. Just can't. I mean, there may be a ton exist, but I just cannot recall who they all are. Guys like Mario Chalmers, the kid that just got drafted and didn't I think he got traded. I think he was in one of those massive deals that happened NBA offseason. Who guys like that, National Player of the Year. That like that. Those are the guys that I think about. Who are obviously talented players. I can't never pronounce that kid's name. Ochi.
Oh, gosh, I know you're talking about. Yeah, I just call him Ochi.
Yeah, he's the one. He just got. Yeah, Ochi. Yeah, he was in the Donovan Mitchell trade, so he's in Utah now. But that's a kid who spent multiple years in college. Like all the guys I think about when I think of Kansas seem to hang around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's what I'm doing with what's his face with Michigan. I mean, with Michigan State.
Yeah, Izzo.
I could, yeah. I mean, I know Jaren Jackson is obviously having success in the NBA, but a lot of the guys, Draymond Green was a 4-year guy. A lot of the guys that go to a school like that, and I think that's what the Michigan State Gonzaga thing is. It's just that you just don't necessarily think of them as like one and done factories. And I guess the difference between that and Kansas is just the fact that at the end of the day, I mean, you look at the issues that have popped up with Kansas, and you're like, okay, well, he's going out and by any means necessary in these guys. And I don't know what the write up on Bill Self was, but I just imagine it's something go to any and all links. I mean, when you're in an investigation like that, that I feel like will never be fully resolved. I feel like, yeah. I mean, you're obviously good enough at what you do to where there's no paper trail, and that's part of recruiting. See John Calipari, who is number one and has never actually been linked to anything. Actually, the weirdest one on that list for me was John Shire. So I'm like,
Yeah,
you
number
just
10.
got here. Yeah, you just got here. Now, like that, I would actually like you. Shire at 10. That's the one. If I'm Tennessee fans, I'm frustrated about because, like, okay, this guy hasn't even coached a game as Duke head coach. I understand he was the lead recruiter on some guys they got, and Duke is kind of a one and done factory now as well. Just like much like Kentucky, God, more so than Kentucky at this point. I understand all that stuff, but I mean, if this is a head coaching deal, we're not talking about assistant coaches who have had success on the recruiting trail. Shire has not had any success as a head coach on the recruiting trail, not in terms of seeing the results pan out on the court. And if Duke goes 20-11 this year, he ain't gonna be getting those guys because now there's questions as to how good of a coach you actually are. So that would bug me. Like personally, I would move those 3 SEC coaches up one and put maybe if you're so inclined to put Shire on the list, put him like 13 or 14 or something like that. I mean, again, it is just whatever list anyway, but I just don't know how much I agree with a list that has a coach who has not actually coached a single college basketball game and putting him on the list, like just sliding him in there in the top 10. I put him 25, whatever. He does well. Who cares? Who cares? Put Rick Barnes 1. Let everybody argue about it. Like put John Calipari 15. You know, I'm glad we don't do the SEC thing anymore because I saw, I can't remember who it was. They said it maybe about 2-3 weeks ago. I think it was Matt Norlander. And I thought about it and I'm like, he kind of has a point, but man, when he just simply said, when you think about it, it's amazing what John Calipari has done as a head coach at Kentucky. And it is kind of crazy that as much as we laugh at the underachieving nature of some of his teams, I'm not sure there's been a more successful coach over the past 15 years in terms of postseason success. He got the one national championship.
Yeah, but how many did Roy Williams win at UNC? Did he just win one? This is a good question, Gino. This is a question I would like to research some more before I chime in too much on it, I guess. Because I think, I mean, you make a that's not a bad point. I'm curious about guys like Roy Williams or, I mean, Bill Self that was his first one he'd won in a long time. Coach K didn't win that many either for the last 15 years. Like if that's your cutoff, yeah.
More I'd say Roy would be up there in a sense because I'm sitting here looking.
Yeah, he won in
Um,
2005, 2009, and 2017. Roy Williams did.
uh, Kay had a bunch of early exits,
Hmm.
and until just a couple years ago, whatchamacallit, like Kentucky didn't. Um, like that is, and it's just such a weird thing. I'm not sure that Norlander actually, expanded upon it. Um, that was one of those I think that you just shoot the tweet off and then just run away giggling for a while because the replies to your tweet, especially as a national college basketball analyst, will be very spicy. And yeah, like I mean, I think you've got, like a Roy Williams, maybe a Bill Self, and then like Calipari there. And again, it's funny, but and way off the the focus of this podcast. And probably the last thing that the listeners want to hear on a Tennessee. uh, that's very interesting. It's very interesting, but yeah, like hey, you know what? Tennessee, go have success. Put yourself up there. Get your own recognition. Go get your own
Hmm.
shine this year. I think I saw somebody has him as a 2 seed, maybe Lenardi. Um, uh, you know, live up to that. Go crush it in March. Win 3 games. Have a chance to play for a Final Four. I mean, and then we'll see what you know. And then with that recruiting class that Tennessee has coming in 2023, let the field of 68 redo that. Those rankings. Let's see where Rick Barnes is.
Yeah, hey, if Julian Phillips goes out this year and balls out and is a lottery pick, I mean, Barnes will move up that list because that'll be Tennessee's first. Well, I mean, be their first lottery pick, but it would be their first like top 10 pick or top 15 pick in a very long time. But the lottery wasn't around back when Ernie and Bernie were playing, for example, or Allen Houston either. But
Well, Tobias Harris, what?
was I think wasn't he right outside lottery? I think he was like 18 or 19. I want to say.
Oh, okay. See,
Yeah, he was
I
right
know,
outside lottery, but
I
he was
know,
top 20 though. Yeah.
I know what's his face. Marcus Hayslip was, I think, right outside.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been
Okay, yeah,
Tennessee hasn't had a lottery pick. I don't think.
yeah, Tobias was 19.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and look, like I said, the standard. We've talked about this before. The standard uh, at that uh, the standard at that size and that position to be a lottery pick is not all that high.
Yep. Right.
Like he doesn't have to be like the difference is he goes out there and averages like 17 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists a game. Guess what, kids? He's going top four.
Yeah.
He averages 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists. He may go 12. Again, I always make the joke. My former team before I swore off any teams was the Chicago Bulls, and they took Florida State's sixth man with the number 4 pick in the draft. Not even a starter. So, um, like the bar for Phillips to clear at that size, if those skills translate to college, like we kind of hope they do, then yeah, he'll be a lottery pick because teach, um, you can't teach those skills. You
Mm.
can't teach that size. You can't teach that athleticism. Like that's something you're essentially born with. And if he so chooses to leave in 7 months or 8 months, whenever it is, whenever the season, whenever he's allowed to leave, um, I mean, Tennessee. The unfortunate thing is Tennessee fans will never see the player that the NBA will see. They'll never see it. You may see glimpses. You may see a little hit there, a little hit there, whatever. Um, like ask Kentucky about it. All the guys they've had that have been like day one picks, like who look so exponentially better in the NBA because they're only in college for 8 months. But like I said, Tennessee's got a chance now with Phillips. Like, man, just go crush it. Go crush it, man, for 8 months. Leave them. You can, you have a good year. Maybe you blow up in March, and guess what everybody's saying? This is the guy. This is the guy that led us to a Final Four. He may not let us because people will get that to Josiah and Vescovy, but there will be no mistake as to who the best player is. And if they're going to go to like the Final Four or something, it's not going to be with Julian Phillips struggling. Let's be clear. Be clear there. Like, Julian Phillips is who, it's what the rankings say he is. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He'll be a big part of what happens in March.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I want to close the podcast here, and I kind of want to talk more about this probably next podcast because I got a feeling there'll probably be a little bit more of kind of preseason polls or whatever out by then. But I saw that I wouldn't have seen it if Tennessee themselves, the Twitter account, hadn't tweeted it out. But the Blue Ribbon early preseason poll has Tennessee number 10 as a preseason top 10 team, and I was kind of surprised. I was expecting Tennessee to be probably top 15, but to see them at 10, I was. Especially with, I guess it makes sense that you return a lot of players. I think that's, the preseason polls, especially in basketball, lean heavily on returning production. And, probably as they should, because that's, what you're getting for those guys. And especially if they're really high productive players like Tennessee has with, Vescovy and James and Ziegler all returning. But Tennessee at 10, Gene, that was kind of intriguing to me. And I think, they're not going to be ranked as high as that team in 2019 was when you returned Grant, Admiral, and Bone and Alexander and that team, and Lamonte Turner and Bowden. Like, it's not going to be ranked as highly as that because you're not returning, your 5 starters and plus 2 off the bench basically, but you are returning, basically 4 starters for you, or at least 4 guys that played significantly heavy minutes for you when healthy last year, and then bringing in some really talented pieces and guys again like a Tyreke Key who's been playing basketball for so long and seems healthy and seems to be doing really well by all indications and reports from practices and stuff right now for Tennessee. But Gene, this is going to be a team that I don't think Blue Ribbon's going to be the only entity that ranks them top 10. Maybe we're going to see Tennessee be a preseason maybe consensus top 10 team or at least top 12 team like that. I was a little surprised to see that, but the more I thought about it, I was like, these voters and stuff do really value returning production, and Tennessee's going to have a lot of returning production for this year. And, that's especially now with the transfer portal and stuff, that's not always the case for teams. And Tennessee has, something that a lot of schools don't, and that is a lot of known commodities coming back for this upcoming season.
But you've got a kid like Key that could, ultimately be a good player. We'll see what happens with BJ Edwards. You've got, you already have the returning production, which is always so big in that. Not many teams get the benefit of the doubt without returning production. I think they did it a few years ago with Kentucky on a team that, they're like, well, he'll figure it out. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. I don't care. Duke, I think when they had the top 3 players in the country with Zion, RJ, and Cam Reddish coming in, I'm guessing they were like top 5. I know they beat Kentucky by like 78 points in the opening night. But usually teams with the production get the benefit of the doubt unless you just have like a ridiculously talented recruiting class. I think Memphis, when he had Wiseman, was probably up there somewhere, but yeah, look, you've got James, you've got Vescovy, you've got Ziegler, Urosh is a piece, you've got the other big kid Adu. Like, you've got guys back that people saw in March. People saw what they could do in March, and they were impressed by it. And So like and then like I said, then you're like, okay, well they got all these guys back. Oh, and they've got a top 15 player in the country coming in. That's good enough for me. And again, like, look, there's no sport where this stuff matters less than college basketball. No sport where it matters less. I mean, you could probably make an argument for like softballs. No major sport where it matters less preseason rankings. But I think the respect is the bigger thing here, and the fact that Tennessee has gained that respect to where, people are like, look, they're 10. It's kind of like Rick Barnes with whatchamacallit, with the recruiting rankings.
Yep.
Yeah. If somebody put Tennessee 14 in the preseason, like, are we really going to be upset about that? No, because you got a season, you can build a resume. That resume will lead to wherever you end up in March, and that'll be the road that you got to take to win the 6 games you need to win to win a national championship. And at some point, that needs to be the standard. Like if you've got a top 15 recruiter in the country, if you're perennially a top 10, top 15 team in the preseason, you've got that respect. You have one of the greatest home fan bases in America. Like at some point, like I understand no Final Fours. Who cares? It's just the year. Who cares? And that just kind of has to be the standard as long as Rick Barnes is there. And you've got the respect. It's just now people are just going to be cautiously optimistic. Like, look, you got to do it. But if they can do it, those are the great things ahead.
Yeah, and just a final note on the top 10 ranking. And again, I imagine we'll talk more about it next episode or even in future ones because more stuff will be coming out. But if Tennessee does, by the time the AP poll comes out, is a top 10 team, that'll only be the 7th time in school history, Gene, that Tennessee has started the year as an AP top 10 team in the preseason. Like I knew it was going to be a small number, but I didn't expect 7. And 2 of those, actually, 2 of those will have been under Rick Barnes. And in fact, one year, the 2020-2021 season, they started the year as number 12 in the country in the AP poll. So, top 15, they'll be top 15. I don't imagine they'll be lower than that, but top 15 3 times under Rick Barnes would be pretty impressive. No other coach at Tennessee can say that. Yeah, Bruce Pearl had him at number 7, and he had him at number 10, but didn't have any other top 15. Oh, no, he had one more top 15 team. The 08-09 team started 14th. So Barnes, and if again, I don't imagine they'll slip further than 15. So Tennessee will be likely an AP top 15 team. Barnes and Pearl will be the only 2 head coaches at Tennessee that have been able to do that. Ray Mears almost did it. He had a team that started 16th in the AP poll, and he had 2 other ones that were in the top 15. So we'll get into that, I'm sure, like I said, next week or in the following weeks. But I just thought it was interesting that they're a top 10 team, and I was a little surprised to see it. But again, as you just kind of laid out, it makes sense. But also, preseason polls mattered very little in any sport, but like you said, probably the least in college basketball. But like you said, it really is a reflection of the respect that and the consistency that the program's had under Rick Barnes and how good they've been on a year in, year out basis over the last 4 or 5 seasons. But that'll wrap up this episode of Vol Basketball Fever. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As I said, top of the show, give this video a like and share it around if you're a Vol fan. Want to hear some recruiting talk about college basketball, recruiting talk for Tennessee specifically, about JP Estrella, about kind of where Rick Barnes is as a recruiter, and just kind of some recruiting talk in general. And then we drifted off and, as we always do, kind of go on some tangents at the end about other topics as well. Then circle back and get back to Tennessee. So hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for the support. Really, really appreciate it. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and Spotify if you can. And again, subscribe to this channel on YouTube if you haven't already, and share the video, share the podcast. Before you know it, it'll be basketball season. I know it's football season right now, but basketball is almost here in Knoxville. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael, and this has been another episode of Vol Basketball Fever. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.